Good morning. Today is the feast day of the first Roman martyrs, or the first martyrs of the Church of Rome, not to be confused with St. Stephen, the proto-martyr. These are the proto-martyrs of Rome, and they were martyred under the reign of terror that was Nero. Nero was a crazy man. He killed one of his wives, killed his mother, and was just like a total sociopath. When Rome burnt while he was emperor, it was greatly suspected that he himself lit the city on fire so that he could build this massive Domus Aurea, this golden palace for himself. And when there was questioning, he blamed it on these new Christians. He said, no, it's those Christians. They set the city on fire. And so a persecution began, and they were martyred, several of them in different ways, some with good old-fashioned crucifixion. Others were covered with animal pelts and thrown into the circus for dogs to come and attack and tear apart. And when we look to the martyrs, especially the early martyrs, we're reminded of the great faith, the great hope, the great courage that they had. And it's something that we ought to strive for as well, to have that great faith, that hope, that courage to be able to do the will of God. Yesterday was the feast day of Saints Peter and Paul, their martyrdom, and we recognize that they embraced their martyrdom freely. I think it was last week we had St. John Fisher and St. Thomas More, who refused to budge on their principles. They stood on their principles, and they recognized that they would not waver. And are we willing to do the same? Are we willing to not waver on our principles? Are we willing to stand firm and to reject that which is false, reject that which is contrary to Christ, and to accept and embrace Christ? These early martyrs could have denied Christ, right? They could have said, oh, never mind. This new thing, no, we're not going to be part of it. In our own lives, when we're out in public, do we profess Christ or do we deny Christ, right? When we're speaking with others and there's an opportunity for us to speak up and to say something, where there's an opportunity for us perhaps to admonish, an opportunity for us perhaps to change the conversation away from gossip or away from some unholy subject, do we just sit there and bite our tongue? Do we participate? Or do we try to move the conversation to something that is more Christ-centered? Perhaps if we do that, we fear reprisal, we fear that we might be made fun of, we fear that we might be pushed aside, we fear that we might be told that we're religious zealots, especially if people are talking about things that are weird and false and can't be true. Are we willing to stand up for the truth, for Christ? Are we willing to stand with Christ? To stand with Christ means that we will face death. To stand with Christ means that we will face martyrdom. Hopefully none of us are going to be covered in animal pelts and thrown into a circus where dogs are going to attack us and eat us. I've been looking at these YouTube channels where people get these big, like, exotic cats, like servals and black panthers, and I'm trying to tell Father Michael that when Frank and Claire kick the bucket, I might replace him with a panther. And he's like, that thing's huge. All it's going to do is try to eat you. I think it would be cool if I walked around the parish with a panther in tow. People wouldn't bother me, right? Because it's this big, scary cat growling at people. Anyway. But to be thrown to the panthers and the tigers and the bears and the whatever else that are going to tear you apart, that's not going to happen to us, I hope. But we will be perhaps thrown to critics who will laugh at us, who will mock us, who will deride us, who will discount us, who will just ignore us. And we're called to stand with Christ. We're called to stand with Christ. From the very beginning of the church, there has been martyrdom. There is still martyrdom today. It's not always martyrdom of blood. Sometimes it's a martyrdom in other ways. But to be part of Christ, to be united to Christ, to stand with Christ, means to embrace the cross. It means to embrace death. And that's why we have these feast days of martyrs, because we look to them as great examples who ran the race, who fought the fight, and who are now wearing the martyr's crown, who are standing in the presence of God Almighty, who are united to him for eternity because they chose him on earth. And so can we do the same? Can we choose Christ always? When it's unpopular, when we've been accused of burning down half a city, can we choose to stand with Christ? Let us ask the intercession of the martyrs of Rome that we may each and every day be able to stand with Christ.